Governor. Well, good afternoon. Thank you. My deep gratitude to Pope Francis, who's been a personal inspiration to me, the Pontifical Academies of Sciences and Social Sciences, Ram, the Chancellor, for convening us. It's really an honor to be here. So at the outset, it's really worth noting that we're in the midst of not one, but three massive, unprecedented, and interrelated transitions, each of which presents tremendous opportunity. So first, we're shifting from an economy that's based on fossil fuels to one that's based on clean energy. And as we've heard repeatedly today, everything depends on how quickly we can make that happen. Second, disruptive climate change is simultaneously accelerating. That trend's going to continue. So as a result, when we think about building out our new clean energy system, we have to consider that we're going to be experiencing worsening physical impacts, heat, floods, storms, and the like, as well as the impacts stemming from climate change transition risk that will affect the insurance industry, financial and real estate markets. So that really means that we have to give a lot of thought to how we're designing and engineering the clean energy systems to withstand those physical impacts. And we've got to work very hard to de-risk clean energy investments and better manage climate risk across the economy. So that's something that we're very focused on. Third, as people adapt to climate change, our societies are going to continue to experience adversity and also just rapid change. In my mind, I sometimes think of this as comparable to punctuated equilibrium. There's going to be abrupt change. Some of it might be very difficult. Some of it might be very positive. There could be technological changes that occur that we don't anticipate. So our job as leaders is to lay the groundwork for long-term, positive, transformative change that yields a lasting and fundamental recalibration of our human relationship to the natural world. You know, at the end of the day, if I were to sort of tie up all of the remarks that we've heard here today, that's really what we're talking about at bottom. So when we speak about the clean energy transition, we've got to think about that transition in context of these related dynamics. So in our role as state government, as a convener, we're working very hard to engage people in a way that both reckons truthfully with the current reality, while also, to Wade's point, building courage and hope that we can achieve a shared vision for a healthier and more equitable and a safer future if we all work hard to change course now. We really have to help people understand through our communications, through innovation, to Dan's point in communication, how we talk to people about this so we get everybody on board with it in a way that doesn't paralyze with fear. So I want to share a few specific points about our clean energy transition. In our whole of government approach, our clean energy strategy and policy informs, and it's woven into all of our other key policy goals. So just a few examples. We're in the process, we have a very old, the oldest in the country, public transportation system. Many of you probably, if you've come to Boston, you've ridden the T. So one of the things we're doing there is modernizing that system anyway. So we are weaving into that all of our climate goals. We have a dire need for housing production in the Commonwealth, and especially workforce housing, which of course we need for clean energy workers. So we are weaving our climate goals into that, and same with stimulating economic development. So for example, our recently established long-term transportation funding task force includes planning for how to fund bus and commuter rail electrification and making that system overall more resilient to the physical impacts of climate change. Governor Healy proposed an historic housing bond bill earlier this year that includes substantial funds to decarbonize our state-owned public housing, but it also puts incentives in place for developers. So those developers that are going to come to the table willing to build new housing that is decarbonized and willing to retrofit existing housing, this is largely affordable housing, that is decarbonized, are going to come to the front of the line for low-income housing tax credits. So those are the ways that state can kind of set the appropriate incentives. As you heard also this morning, we have an economic development bond bill, Mass Leads, an historic $1.3 billion investment for climate tech. And these are technologies that are already blooming in Massachusetts. And so we have a terrific ecosystem there that includes, all of the early stage financing that we've used for life sciences, the academic institutions that we have, the culture of innovation that characterizes our state. And these technologies already include folks who are working on making manufacturing processes more energy efficient, producing lower embodied carbon building materials, recycling technology for electric vehicle batteries. So this stuff is on the ground, and we just want to continue to grow that. Massachusetts state law requires us to prepare a clean energy and climate plan. It's done so since 2008. And there was intervening legislation that requires us, we have a legislative mandate to get to net zero by 2050. By shifting away from fossil fuels, which are of course price volatile, to in our power sector, our building sector, and our transportation sectors. And also by conserving our forest, wetlands, and agricultural lands that will offset any remaining greenhouse gas emissions in 2050. I was explaining to Kanjian at the lunch break, if you were to look at the graph of our emissions reductions, we have roughly 7.5 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalents that we never achieve by 2050 without natural and working lands. So it's critical for us to ensure that we have that carbon sequestration capacity. Roughly half of our electric load today is met with clean generation. So that is really a success story. And that reflects our significant progress to date in building renewable energy within Massachusetts, but also working with our regional partners to source clean energy. We do, however, face significant challenges in deploying clean energy at scale, as others have referenced, and at the pace that's necessary to meet our power sector interim targets, particularly for 2030 and, by implication, our net zero by 2050. So for 2030, our goal is to reduce electric power sector emissions 70% from our 1990 levels to 8.4 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. Without substantial additions of clean energy, and of course, we bear in mind and prioritize a need for enhanced demand-side management, that is increasing energy efficiency, we won't get there on our vehicle and building electrification targets because, of course, they rely on having an increasingly clean electric power sector to provide that energy. So, for example, from 2030 onward, we need about 1 gigawatt of both solar and wind annually in order to keep pace with electrification and reach net zero. So by comparison, the most that we've installed just for solar in a single year is about 600 megawatts. So just this year, we have our first offshore wind project, and it's only the second commercial offshore wind project in the United States. It's Vineyard Wind. Began generating clean energy. It's expected to be fully complete later this year. And at that point, we're going to be getting about 800 megawatts of clean energy generated from that project. That's enough to power about 400,000 homes, but of course, we need much more than that. So increasing cost of offshore wind due to inflation, supply chain constraints that became quite pronounced after the COVID pandemic and after the war in Ukraine have created challenges. But our response to that was to issue a new 5,600 megawatt RFP, and we're in the process of reviewing those bids right now. Siting renewable energy, as in many places, and storage can be very difficult. It can take a long time in our region, both because of delays in connecting to the grid and due to land use conflicts. So delays of up 8 years for interconnection can make projects uneconomic, particularly for solar and project developers. These delays equate to lost jobs and lost municipal revenue. They can be caused by lack of hosting capacity on the distribution system, less necessary equipment like transformers, cost allocation methodologies that don't recognize all beneficiaries of grid upgrades, historic underinvestment in distribution system infrastructure in certain locations. So we have seen some positive movement. Utilities currently deploying around $1.7 billion in grid modernization investments. That will be things like advancing two-way metering. They will help facilitate interconnection, optimization of renewables and storage. Will also pave the way for virtual power plants, very, very exciting technology, but we need them to do more. Conflicts in land use can also result in delay, so I'm going to skip ahead here because although I practiced this and it came in at 10 minutes, I'm now a little bit behind here. So I do want to tell you that in the past, we've had a lot of trouble siting solar. Long story short, the incentives really incentivize people to put solar into previously forested land. So we now know that mature forests are really doing the heavy lifting in terms of carbon sequestration. You've probably seen the study that came out recently that showed that the Northeast is, because it's reforested now after colonial deforestation, it's achieving about 1 to 2 degrees Celsius emissions reduction annually. So what we're doing now, and we've worked with a number of experts in this area, is to, and I will wrap up momentarily, is to ensure that our solar policy allows us to preserve mature forests while also building out the solar that we need. So it's another way that we've recently been able to partner with experts. So I'm going to stop there. If you'd like to learn more about other things that we're doing, I'm happy to talk to you about it. I will say 2 quick points to wrap up. The governor earlier this year issued an executive order that established a siting commission to help us solve some of these problems. It will help to expedite permitting and make it a lot easier to site these projects. And secondly, we are undertaking and exploring an effort now for a comprehensive state land use vision that will help us deconflict early on what we want to do in terms of transportation expansion, siting renewable energies, housing production, and preservation of our natural and working lands. So thanks again. We are very excited to be here. And I will just close with my thought about what guides my thinking every day. And I hear a little bit of this in what people presented, which is I ask myself the question, what would it look like if our actions in the world reflected our understanding that our own human health and thriving is dependent on the health and integrity of the natural world? Thank you.